My name is Eleanor, and I am 68 years old. For the past 5 years, my world has been a quiet, grayscale portrait. The vibrant colors of my life faded the day I buried my husband, Michael. He was my everything, my high school sweetheart, my confidant, my partner in every sense of the word. A sudden, cruel heart attack stole him from me, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence in our home. I live in the same house we bought 40 years ago, a house where every corner holds a memory, every creak in the floorboards whispers his name. Our 2 children are grown and have their own lives in different cities. They call, they visit on holidays, but the day-to-day quiet is my constant companion. I find solace in my garden, in the familiar routine of pruning roses and tending to the hydrangeas Michael had planted. It's a simple, lonely life, but it's mine. The strange events began a few weeks ago. Small things at first, things I dismissed as the forgetfulness of an aging mind. A book I was certain I had left on the nightstand would appear on the kitchen counter. A half-finished cup of tea I'd left in the living room would be rinsed and sitting in the dish rack. One morning, I came downstairs to find the thermostat, which I always keep at a steady 68 degrees, turned up to 72, the exact temperature Michael always preferred. I brushed it off. I told myself I was tired, that grief was playing tricks on my memory. My daughter, Sarah, had been worried about me living alone. "Mom, maybe you should think about getting a security system," she suggested during one of our weekly calls. "Just for peace of mind." To appease her, I agreed. A young technician came and installed a few small, discreet cameras, one covering the front door, one for the back patio, and one in the main living area, which also had a clear view into the kitchen. I rarely checked the footage. The system was mostly for Sarah's peace of mind, not mine. What was there to see in my quiet, empty house? That changed last night. I woke up around 2 a.m. with a thirst I couldn't ignore. As I walked down the hallway, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. The house felt different. There was a faint, almost imperceptible scent in the air. A scent I hadn't smelled in 5 years. Michael's aftershave, a classic, spicy fragrance he had worn every day of his life. My heart began to pound against my ribs. "You're imagining it, Eleanor," I whispered to myself. "It's just a memory." But the scent was too real, too present. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water with a trembling hand, and returned to bed, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling. It was as if a ghost had just walked through my home. This morning, driven by a nagging curiosity I couldn't explain, I decided to check the security camera footage from the previous night. I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open, my coffee growing cold. I clicked on the timeline for the living room camera and fast-forwarded through the hours of silent, empty darkness. Nothing, just shadows moving as the moon traversed the sky. I was about to close the laptop, feeling foolish, when I decided to check again, this time more slowly. I dragged the timeline cursor to 2:13 a.m., the moment just before I had woken up. And then I saw it. My breath hitched in my throat. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor, but I didn't hear it. All I could see was the screen. A figure emerged from the shadows of the hallway and walked into the kitchen. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a familiar, confident gait. He was wearing a dark plaid shirt, the kind Michael always wore on cool evenings. The camera's night vision rendered everything in ghostly shades of gray, but there was no mistaking him. The way he moved, the way he carried himself, the shape of his head, the line of his shoulders. It was Michael, my husband, who died 5 years ago. My husband, whose ashes were in an urn on the mantelpiece. He opened it, the soft light illuminating his profile for just a second. He took out the milk carton, poured a glass, and drank it standing right there, just as he always used to do when he couldn't sleep. He then rinsed the glass and placed it in the sink. He stood there for a moment, his back to the camera, looking around the kitchen as if reacquainting himself with the space. Then, as silently as he had appeared, He turned and walked back into the darkness of the hallway, out of the camera's view. I stared at the screen, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief and terror. I replayed the clip, again and again and again. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a glitch. It was real. A man who looked exactly like my dead husband had been in my kitchen. My first thought was that I was losing my mind. That grief had finally shattered my sanity. But the image was too clear, too steady. My second thought was that it was a ghost. My scientific mind rebelled against the idea. But what other explanation could there be? Was Michael's spirit still here, watching over me, rinsing his milk glass in the dead of night? The idea was both comforting and utterly terrifying. My third thought, the one that made my blood run cold, was that it wasn't a ghost. And it wasn't Michael. It was someone else. Someone who looked like him. Someone who knew his habits. Someone who had a key to my house. Who would do such a thing? And why? Was it a cruel prank? Or was it something far more sinister? I thought of my children, Sarah and David. They loved their father, but they had also been struggling financially. Could they be involved? The thought was so monstrous, I immediately pushed it away. No, it was impossible. But the image on the screen remained. A ghost, a madman, or a meticulously planned deception. My quiet, lonely life was over. A 5-year-old grave had just been opened, and a terrifying mystery had just walked out of it and into my kitchen. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had to find out who this man was. My life, and perhaps my sanity, depended on it. The image of the man in my kitchen haunted me. For 2 days, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me jump. The familiar scent of Michael's aftershave now felt like a threat, a prelude to an intrusion. I rewatched the footage 100 times, my finger tracing the outline of the figure on the screen. It was him. And yet it couldn't be. I had to tell someone, but who? If I told my children, they would think I was hallucinating and insist on moving me into a care facility, which was their not-so-subtle wish anyway. If I called the police, what would I say? "Officer, I think my dead husband is making midnight snacks in my kitchen." They would send a psychologist, not a detective. I needed proof. I needed to know if this was a one-time occurrence or a pattern. I became a hunter in my own home. I started leaving traps. I placed a single strand of my hair across the door of Michael's old study, a room I never entered. I put a tiny, almost invisible dab of clear nail polish on the lid of the cookie jar. I began to meticulously check the camera footage every single morning. For 3 nights, nothing. The house remained silent and empty. The hair was undisturbed, the nail polish untouched. I started to think I had imagined it all, that the single clip was a fluke, a trick of light and shadow. On the 4th night, it happened again. At 2:41 a.m., the camera caught the motion. The figure appeared again. This time, he didn't go to the kitchen. He walked directly to the living room bookshelf. He ran a hand along the spines of Michael's favorite history books, his touch gentle, familiar. He pulled one out, a thick volume on the Civil War, and sat in Michael's armchair. He didn't turn on a light. He just sat there in the dark, holding the book, as if the very act of holding it was a comfort. He sat for nearly 10 minutes before placing the book back, precisely in its spot, and vanishing back into the shadows. My heart hammered in my chest. This was not random. This was specific. This person knew Michael's habits, his favorite books, his chair. The thought was terrifying. The next morning, I found my proof. The strand of hair on the study door was broken. I raced to the living room bookshelf. The Civil War book was exactly where it should be, but when I pulled it out, a single, crisp $5 bill fell out from between the pages. It was an old game Michael and I used to play. We'd hide small amounts of money in each other's favorite books as a little surprise. Finding that $5 bill was like a punch to the gut. It was a message. But from whom? The idea that my children were behind this, once unthinkable, now began to take root in my mind like a stubborn weed. David, my son, was an architect. He was meticulous, a planner. He had been struggling with a new firm he had started. And Sarah, my daughter, was married to a man with a gambling problem. A secret she thought I didn't know about. They both needed money. They both knew their father's habits intimately. Was this their sick way of trying to drive me insane? To make me believe I was losing my mind so they could get power of attorney, sell the house, and solve their financial problems? The cruelty of the idea was staggering, but it made a twisted kind of sense. I needed an ally, someone outside the family. I thought of Chloe, my best friend from my book club. She was a retired journalist, sharp as a tack with a healthy dose of cynicism. I invited her over for tea, my hands shaking as I set out the cups. "Eleanor, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said the moment she saw me. "Maybe I have, Chloe," I whispered, and I told her everything. I showed her the footage, the broken hair, the $5 bill. She watched the video, her brow furrowed in concentration. She replayed it several times. "The walk. It's uncanny," she murmured. "But look here." She paused the video at the exact moment the kitchen light illuminated the man's face. The eyes are the same, the nose is the same, but look at his left ear. Is that a scar? I peered at the screen. There, on the grainy footage, was a faint white line on his earlobe, something Michael never had. "And his hands," Chloe continued, zooming in. Michael's hands were a carpenter's hands, even in his later years. Rough, calloused. This man's hands, they look softer. A wave of relief and a fresh wave of terror washed over me. It wasn't Michael, but it was someone who looked so much like him it was chilling. A doppelganger. "Who could it be?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "There's only one way to find out," Chloe said, her journalist instincts kicking in. "We follow the ghost." The plan was simple. I would pretend to go out of town for the weekend to visit my cousin. I would pack a bag, have a taxi pick me up, and make a show of leaving. But instead of going to the train station, I would circle back and stay with Chloe, whose house was just a few blocks away. From there, we would watch my house. And when our ghost appeared, we would be ready. That weekend, as I packed my bag, my son David called. "Mom, Sarah told me you've been a little forgetful lately. Are you sure you should be traveling alone?" His voice was laced with a fake, cloying concern that made my skin crawl. "I'm perfectly fine, David," I said, keeping my voice light. "A change of scenery will do me good." "Okay, Mom, just be careful," he said. The lie came so easily to him. He was checking on me, making sure the stage was set for their little play. The taxi came. I waved goodbye to my nosy neighbor, and I left. An hour later, I was sitting in Chloe's living room, a pair of binoculars in my hand, my eyes fixed on the dark, silent shape of my own home. The hunt had begun. We were no longer the prey. We were the hunters. The first night of our stakeout was agonizingly quiet. Chloe and I sat in her darkened living room, taking turns watching my house through the binoculars. We drank endless cups of tea and spoke in hushed whispers, like two teenage girls on a spy mission. But nothing happened. The house remained dark and still. Doubt began to creep back in. Had he known? Was the whole thing just a bizarre, isolated incident? "Patience, Ellie," Chloe said, sensing my frustration. "If he has a key, he feels safe. He thinks you're gone for the whole weekend. He'll show." The second night, our patience was rewarded. Around 1 a.m., a dark, unremarkable sedan pulled up a few houses down the street from my home. The driver cut the engine and the lights, and for a long time, nothing happened. Then, a figure emerged from the car. Even from a distance, the familiar silhouette made my breath catch. He moved quickly and quietly, sticking to the shadows, and let himself into my house through the back door. He had a key. "He's in," I whispered, my heart thumping. "Okay," Chloe said, "all business. Now we wait. I have a friend at the DMV. I took a picture of the license plate. We'll know who owns that car by morning." I watched my own house, now occupied by a stranger who looked like my dead husband, and felt a chilling cocktail of fear and rage. Who was he? And what did he want? We watched for over an hour. A light went on in the upstairs study, Michael's old sanctuary. The room I had kept locked for 5 years. The man was in there. What was he doing? Was he searching for something? Then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he was gone. The light went out. He slipped out the back door, got back in his car, and drove away. The next morning, Chloe got a call. "I have a name," she said, scribbling on a notepad. "The car is registered to a man named Jacob Miller. Lives about an hour from here. No criminal record. Works as a history professor at the local community college." A history professor. Michael was a history buff. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. "But that's not all," Chloe said, her voice grim. "I did a little more digging. Jacob Miller has a brother. An identical twin brother." She paused, looking at me. His brother's name was Michael Miller. The world tilted on its axis. Michael had a twin brother? In 45 years of marriage, he had never once mentioned a brother, let alone an identical twin. It was impossible. I knew everything about him, didn't I? "Chloe, that can't be right," I stammered. "Michael was an only child. His parents told me so. They're gone now, but I knew them for years." "People keep secrets, Ellie," she said gently. "Big ones." The story she uncovered was a tragedy. Michael and Jacob were born to a young unmarried mother in a small town. They were put up for adoption and separated. Michael was adopted by a loving couple who raised him as their own. Jacob was adopted by a family that was less fortunate. His adoptive father was abusive. He ran away at 16 and had a difficult life, but eventually put himself through college and became a professor. According to public records, he had tried to find his birth mother and any potential siblings years ago, but had hit a dead end. How had he found me now? And why was he sneaking into my house? The answer, I suspected, lay with my children. When I returned from my trip, I went straight to Michael's study. The strand of hair I'd placed on the door was gone. Inside, everything looked the same, but it felt different. I ran my hand along his desk. Underneath, my fingers brushed against something taped to the wood. A small key. I had never seen it before. It didn't belong to any lock in the house. A key to a safe deposit box? The next day, I confronted my children. I didn't tell them what I knew. I played the part of the confused, frightened mother. I called Sarah, my voice trembling. "Sarah, honey, I think someone has been in the house," I said. "Things are moved. I keep smelling your father's aftershave. I think I'm going crazy." There was a pause on the line. "Oh, Mom, you're just tired," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too rehearsed. "You're probably just imagining things. Why don't you let David and me handle things for a while? We can take care of the bills, the house." "Like power of attorney?" I asked, my voice sharp. Another pause. "Well, yes, to make things easier for you." The trap was laid bare. I hung up, my heart heavy with the confirmation of their betrayal. They had found him. They had found their father's long-lost twin brother and were using him as a pawn in their sick game to have me declared incompetent. They were parading their father's ghost in front of me to break my spirit. The rage that filled me was cold and pure. They had not only betrayed me, but they had desecrated the memory of their father, using his own brother as a weapon against their mother. I called Chloe. "I know what they're doing," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And now, I know what I'm going to do." My plan began to form. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to turn the tables. It was time for the ghost to start haunting the right people. My first step was to find Jacob Miller. If he was a pawn, he needed to know what game he was in. Chloe found his address and his office hours at the college. The next afternoon, I drove to the campus. I sat in my car, watching him walk out of a lecture hall. Seeing him in the daylight was a shock. He was the spitting image of my Michael, but older, more tired. The lines on his face were deeper, etched by a harder life. I got out of the car and approached him. "Professor Miller?" I called out. He turned, and for a moment his eyes widened in shock. He was seeing a ghost of his own. He thought he was seeing his sister-in-law, a woman he had only seen in pictures. "My name is Eleanor Miller," I said, extending my hand. "I believe you've been visiting my house. We need to talk about my children." Jacob Miller stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and guilt. We sat in a quiet corner of the campus coffee shop. The story he told me was even sadder and more sordid than I had imagined. "They found me about 3 months ago," he said, his voice raspy. "David and Sarah. They showed up at my office. They told me who they were, that their father, my brother, was gone." He paused, his eyes clouding over. "I never got to meet him. I'd been searching for him for decades. They told me you were not well," he continued, unable to meet my eyes. "They said you were deep in grief, suffering from delusions, convinced Michael was still alive. They said they were worried you would hurt yourself." The audacity of their lies took my breath away. "They asked me to help," he said, shamefaced. "They said if I could just appear, let you see me. It might shock you back to reality. They said it was a kind of experimental therapy their doctor had suggested." "And you believed them?" I asked, my voice laced with ice. "I wanted to believe them," he confessed. "They were my only connection to the brother I never knew. They gave me his old photos, told me stories about him, about his habits, his favorite books. They gave me his old shirt, they even gave me a key to the house. They told me when you'd be out. It felt wrong, but they were so convincing. They said it was to help you." "They are not trying to help me, Jacob," I said, my voice hard as steel. "They are trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so they can sell my house and get their hands on their father's estate. You are not a part of their therapy. You are a part of their fraud." I showed him a copy of a legal document Chloe had obtained. A petition filed by my children to grant them emergency guardianship over my assets, citing my erratic behavior and delusions. The color drained from Jacob's face. He looked at the document, then at me, and the full weight of his unwitting role in their scheme crashed down on him. "My God," he whispered. "What have I done?" "You did what they manipulated you into doing," I said. "But now you can help me make it right." And so the ghost switched allegiances. Our plan was audacious, theatrical, and deeply satisfying. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for the following week. David and Sarah had built their case around my delusions. Their star witness was to be Dr. Evans, a hired psychologist who would testify about my fragile mental state. Their key evidence was the testimony of my nosy neighbor, who had seen me talking to myself in the garden. I was, of course, talking to my roses, and the secret recordings my own children had made of me late at night, whispering their father's name. The day of the hearing arrived. I sat in the courtroom, playing the part of a frail, confused old woman. David and Sarah sat at the opposing table, their faces masks of false concern. Their lawyer laid out their case. He spoke of my deep grief, my inability to accept my husband's death, my increasingly bizarre behavior. He called my neighbor, who dutifully recounted my strange habits. He played the recordings of me whispering, "Michael," in the dark. Then he called Dr. Evans, who, after a brief evaluation, a 5-minute phone call Sarah had ambushed me with, testified that I was showing clear signs of delusional disorder. It was all going according to their plan. David and Sarah exchanged a small, triumphant look. Then it was my lawyer's turn. "The defense calls Jacob Miller to the stand," she announced. David and Sarah froze. Their heads whipped around to see Jacob, my Michael's twin, walk steadily to the witness stand. The resemblance was so striking the entire courtroom murmured. "Mr. Miller," my lawyer began, "have you recently been inside Mrs. Miller's home?" "Yes, I have," Jacob said, his voice clear. "And why were you there?" "I was there at the request of David and Sarah Miller," he said, looking directly at my children. They told me their mother was suffering from delusions. They asked me to impersonate my deceased twin brother, Michael, in an effort to, and I quote, shock her back to reality. They gave me a key, his clothes, and detailed instructions on how to behave like him. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel for order. David and Sarah were staring at Jacob, their faces a mask of pure horror. Their secret weapon had just turned on them. But I wasn't finished. Your Honor, my lawyer said, the petitioners have based their entire case on my client's delusion that she is seeing her dead husband. But she was not delusional. She was seeing him. She gestured to Jacob. Furthermore, they claim she is financially incompetent. On the contrary, my client has recently made a very shrewd and significant financial move. She produced another set of documents. Weeks ago, anticipating this very action from her children, Mrs. Miller legally restructured her assets. The house, the stocks, the savings, everything her children are so eager to control, have been transferred into an irrevocable trust. And who is the beneficiary of this trust, Your Honor? My lawyer continued, a dramatic pause. The beneficiary is a new charitable foundation established by my client, the Michael Miller Foundation for Families of the Missing, dedicated to helping people like Jacob find their lost relatives. The second bombshell had landed. David and Sarah were not just exposed as liars and manipulators, they were disinherited. They had tried to steal an estate that no longer existed for them. Sarah let out a strangled sob. David just sat there, his face ashen, his empire of lies crumbling around him. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice, his voice dripping with contempt. He warned my children that he was recommending the district attorney investigate them for conspiracy to commit fraud. I walked out of the courtroom, leaving them in the wreckage of their own greed. As I passed them, Sarah looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Mom, why?" she whispered. I leaned down and said, my voice just for her, "Because your father taught me to tend to my garden, and sometimes that means you have to pull out the weeds." I walked out into the sunshine, with Chloe and Jacob by my side. For the first time in 5 years, the grayscale world began to feel a little bit like color again. My husband was gone. But in a strange, unexpected way, he had sent me a brother to help me close this final, painful chapter. And together, we were going to build something beautiful and lasting in his name. The quiet life was over. A new, purposeful life had just begun.